I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Geno TV and Channel 99. As part of our series with candidates running for Tim Madden's seat in the state general court, as it's technically known.
Technically.
The House of Representatives, the Assembly, whatever. We have Tobias Glidden with us today. Tobias,
Pleasure to be here, Dan.
Nice to have you again. Didn't expect you back so soon, but we did your exit interview as a selectman. And all of a sudden, here you are going off on another venture. Well, before we get into that, let us talk for a minute about your strategy here. You are not on the ballot in the primary on September 8th. You will be on the ballot in the general election in November.
Yep.
What's the rationale for all that?
The rationale is it makes more sense to be an independent. I think that's a way most of the voters are aligned in the district. I also think I'm going to register as a Democrat once I'm elected, but I think that's the most effective way to get things done. You're representing the people, not a party. And it just seems like a good platform to move forward on. And Tim Madden was very successful in that approach, following those same paths.
I think one other person is doing the same thing. Is that not true?
Yeah, but
you don't have to mention any names.
Yeah.
But I think there is going to be another person as well.
Yeah, I think they're much more Republicanly minded, so I don't think they'll be very successful, and they haven't really been doing any campaigning or been a serious candidate so far. So we'll see how that goes.
So what brings you to this race?
Well, a couple things. Tim Madden, came and talked to me about running. We had an ongoing.
He came to you.
He came to me, and we had an ongoing conversation for about a month or so about it. And I talked to a number of friends I have in Falmouth and in Martha's Vineyard and on Nantucket, and most importantly, Justine, my partner. And it wasn't planned, but it seemed like a great opportunity, and it seemed like I could continue to do a lot of the good I've done on Nantucket at the State House.
Why don't you describe some of your experience for us?
My experience?
Yes.
So for those of you who don't know me, my experience then has been on the Board of Selectmen mainly. I was on the capital programs, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, the CPC. My main focus while I was on the board was issues revolving around affordable housing, water quality, making sure we're financially stable as a town, something a lot of people forget about, but it's really important. Making sure our harbors are clean, making sure the town's operating, efficiently. So a whole range of issues, very well being on the airport, but the Board of Selectmen, you got a $100 million budget, more or less, you're trying to deal with, 600 staff, and a range of different issues. I would like to see us working more on the dump. That's something in years to come that we're going to have to work on. Water quality, we got a lot more progress to make.
Let's take a step back for a minute. Let's talk about, you've got a diverse district here. Falmouth, Martha's Vineyard, the whole lot, 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard, part of Falmouth, and all of Nantucket. What are the common issues that the legislature needs to be concerned with for the entire constituency?
Well, I think I've knocked on a number of doors over in Falmouth on the vineyard, and then I know Nantucket very well. And I'd say there's kind of two main things. The first one I would say is affordable housing. I have experience working on the housing bank article that's just got out of committee up at the State House. That kind of ties the market with the creation of affordable housing, just like the land bank does. Affordable housing.
But that only applies to Nantucket, right?
That'll apply to the whole district.
Will it? Okay.
The way home rule petitions are usually drafted are for the district, not for an individual town. And so there'll be some flexibility there for other towns to adopt it if they're interested.
Okay.
So affordable housing, and then water quality. And when I say water quality, I mean that in a very broad way. It comes down to climate change, ocean acidification, overfishing, nitrification of our waters, which creates local acidification of our waters, and there is a huge cost associated with these various issues. We've talked a lot about in the past about armoring beaches. We're going to be looking at maybe armoring a lot more in the future. We're going to see a foot of sea level rise by 2050. Currently that's going to see the Haulover kind of washed out and our harbor opened up to the ocean, and that's about 44 years away. So or 34 years away. So it's not long,
It's
34
going to be
years.
just that much, though, at the end of 50 years. By 100 years, it'll be that much.
Yeah. Well, 50 years is a by 2050 we're looking at a meter.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Right.
2050 we're looking at a meter of sea level rise. So that'll see at high tide Washington Street flooded.
Okay. But is this, why is this such an important issue for the other parts of the district?
So for Falmouth, I think it's hugely, it's very impactful. They have a huge waterfront. Woods Hole, the Hui, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, is based right on the water. It's very low, so they're already seeing lots of flooding of their buildings. Water quality, nitrogen is going to have a huge impact on the harbors. I know you're very involved with the Shellfish Association. The ability to pay for sewers and other mechanisms to deal with nitrogen are a huge issue for our community and our district.
What are the issues that are particular to Nantucket that the legislature needs to be concerned with? Are there any?
I think when it comes to particularly Nantucket, I would say we share a lot of the same issues as the Vineyard. In the opioid crisis is hugely important for us. Mental health, we just don't have any rehab beds here. So if you have a mental health or an opioid crisis, there's possibly some place for you to go on the mainland. Here, there's zero place, and so I think that's a big issue that's affected me and the island, especially. The state needs to be aware that we're not receiving any of those services that the Cape provides on the islands, and we need to make sure we have rehab beds and mental assistance for people who
it
need
goes
it.
beyond that to shelters for abused
Oh yeah,
women and so forth.
all that mental health, all of that, we really need to focus on. And I'm hoping, as the Board of Selectmen on Nantucket starts to expand, some of the building projects we've been talking about, that some of those issues will be incorporated. Once the hospital gets finished, and as they're finishing up that project, hopefully in the coming years, we'll be able to have a conversation between the town and the hospital about how can the town participate in funding, maybe a clean house or a bed, or through the contract review committee we fund about $400,000 in various health-related services for the community, and we're one of 2 communities in Massachusetts that does that. And I think that's very important to continue to expand that funding mechanism through the town.
It's been flat for years.
Yeah,
as long as I can remember.
It went up about $50,000 last year, and really it needs to be doubled or tripled. I think it's the state and the federal government doesn't do a great job in providing health services, and I think if we balance out and we look at what we're spending money on as a community, we can spend $1 million or $2 million dealing with some health problems that are really affecting people, and because we're already spending millions on our trash. Let's spend $1 million on our mental health problems and opiate problems.
It's hard to come by information for the ordinary person. It's hard to come by information on what's going on in the legislature.
Yeah.
How would you suggest that could be remedied?
Yeah, so one of the first things I did when I got on the Board of Selectmen was I started doing workshops on the board, and that encouraged better communication. One thing I'd like to do is do like a district-wide legislative committee, that's has maybe a couple representatives from the Vineyard, a couple from Nantucket, and a couple from Falmouth that maybe meet quarterly to talk about issues that the islands are facing, and move around between the 3, Woods Hole, Nantucket, and the Vineyard, and have a conversation about what's going on at the legislature so people are engaged. It's really hard as a state representative if you're trying to individually connect with everybody, but I think if you build another level of people that you can communicate to, that are then going out in the community, reaching out for information, saying, what do we need our state legislator to do? We need another mechanism, another organization that's focused on doing that. Because we have a big voice at the State House, and we need to make it bigger.
Well, Nantucket's only 20% of the voters in the district. So how do we really get ourselves heard?
Well, I think there's been talk in the past about having some, I really think the town of Nantucket has a lot of interests, and we have one state representative, and
whom we share.
Who we share, and I think when you look at trying to get a particular issue passed, I've worked with Vineyard Power over on Martha's Vineyard trying to get community empowerment passed, which is an energy-related legislation that pertains to the wind turbines being built south of the vineyard. And what they've done as a nonprofit, but with support of the towns, is gone out and legislated and lobbied individual state representatives and senators and the governor to get their issues passed. I think we as a community need to be giving more support for our state representative to get things done. Look at the influence you have on Nantucket and your background and your skills. But imagine a state representative going up to the state house and they're getting paid $60,000 a year and they have one staff person, and you're asking them to make an influence for 30,000 people. You need to give them more resources as a town to get things done. And so I think facilitating that through the budget process and through the planning process to say, hey, we're going to put some money behind an issue to make sure we get it passed at the state house is important.
Are there some issues that the towns need to cooperate on amongst themselves in bringing them to the legislature?
I think climate change is the biggest one. We have a great opportunity to really be the change makers in Massachusetts. Sea level rise is affecting us
Daily.
especially daily, and water quality. And I think working together on those issues and renewable energy is really important. We have a chance to really be the beacon for the rest of the state and the country. We've got the skills here, we've got the finances, we've got the infrastructure. Let's just do it. So I think working together in that regard on those issues is really important.
How much of an impact can the legislature have on things like clean water or affordable housing?
Well, I think in some regards, getting out of the local community's way. 40B was a great example. It's a piece of legislation set up to create developments. Right, 25% of the units built go towards affordable housing. 75% are not affordable. Right. So the state is mandating the creation of more market rate housing and not the creation of more affordable housing. So they're circumventing our zoning, and they're causing the problem to get greater and greater instead of letting us deal with it in our own zoning and allowing us to incentivize our own affordable housing programs.
It's a discussion for another time, but I'd be very interested in your views on whether Nantucket has the will to do that.
Well,
but that's not relevant to this discussion.
Yeah, and I think that's part of a job as a state representative is you're not just working on issues at the state house. You're working with your community to say what's really valuable for our community and how do we deal with that issue. I think affordable housing is really important to us as a community, and part of my job is to convince the people of Nantucket that it is really important. 3 years ago when I got on the Board of Selectmen, it wasn't a big issue. It was talked about, but we weren't doing anything. Now we're doing things 3 years later. So that's part of your job as a state representative.
What about on water quality? What can the state do there? What can the legislature do?
I would like to see, as far as Martha's Vineyard, Falmouth, and Nantucket, there's a huge amount of pressure for sewering. I think that comes from the state thinking that that's the best way to go. I think there's a lot that can be done with tight tanks. I think we should be going up to the state and saying, how can we make this work? It's not going to work everywhere, but it can definitely work in a lot of far-reaching areas of the island that it doesn't make sense to put in a quarter-mile sewer pipe down to someone's house out in Pulpus who's way out on the water out in Pocomo. But it makes a lot of sense to put a tight tank in there, and when you look at the cost benefit, it makes way more sense to ask someone to put in a tight tank than ask them to put in a $100,000 AI system, innovative alternative systems, that only takes out 50% of the nitrogen.
What would you, as you go forward to the election in November, what do you want the voters to think about you, to remember about you?
I want the voters to remember that I'm going to represent the islands. I know what it's like to be an islander. I have a history of working in the trades. I have a history of working on the islands, and we need someone who's going to represent the islands. There's 159 state representatives representing the rest of the state, and we need one representing the islands.
What if somebody from Falmouth hears that, sees this interview, and hears you say that?
Well,
what are they gonna think?
Well, I think they can see that Falmouth has a lot of issues similar to the islands, and what benefits the islands is also going to benefit Falmouth specifically as well, because Falmouth is very different than the rest of the Cape.
Tobias? Glidden, thank you so much, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Dan, and I'll look for everybody's vote on November 8th. Cheers.
Fair enough.